My mic was muted. So anyways, like I was saying, where did my captions go? Aha, there we are. Okay, perfect. Finally, we are ready to begin. So as far as flex business, I think since it's an assembly, you guys just stay in here and they'll call us based on the room number. So we'll hang out for that. But the main goal for today, besides the actual goal of the conceptual level, is we're going to walk through 6.1, talking about how you can actually start applying these media queries and how you can start making your page respond to a variety of different users and a variety of different use cases. So if we check our thread to start off, I'll close this. There are a couple extra links I've added into here, right? We've got, actually, let's just go through the agenda first. We're going to do media queries on each of the separate style sheets. So that's why we had so many. It's also to show you guys how you can have multiple style sheets per HTML document. If you're bored, you finish early, and you want to try something using media queries, I have a challenge here for you. You can create a web page that scales nicely from a desktop resolution, so something typical to your screen, down to a mobile resolution. So if you want any tips on the challenge, you can do that. That's just extra practice. It's not graded. But our goals for the day are to apply our media queries to increase our web page responsiveness. So I've added some extra resources here. Some advanced media query breakdowns, some stuff on referencing and using available space. And if you're going to try that challenge, you can use this mobile first CSS guide to make your page look good on a phone before you start doing anything crazy with the desktop version. And then here's another reminder and walkthrough on how to do media queries, just in case you need it later on. But let's actually get into what that looks like today. So let me go back over here. You guys should have VS Code open at this point. And I'm going to go File, Open Folder, and then open up my 6-period web design folder. Or sorry, my 6-period Unit 6 folder, which is right down here. It's weird that it's not. Oh, I spelled my own name wrong. That would be why. Okay, so I'm going to select this folder. This is what we've done so far for 6. Have we done? Wait, I think I was experimenting on yours. Okay, ignore that. Don't look behind the curtain. It's going to take all this media stuff off. Toggle that. I actually need to go back to black and white style. Okay, I need to get rid of this. Sorry, this is where I was experimenting to make sure that it was working. Get rid of all this. Do this. Okay, so from earlier this week, I'm going to go live here shortly. Earlier this week, we set up our root folder with our HTML page for 6.1. We made our div classes, and we linked all 3 of these style sheets here so that we know for sure that each of them are working. So if I go to 6.1 and run that, you can tell that each of our style sheets, because each of these 3 CSS rules are on a different CSS file, you can tell that all 3 of them are working correctly. This was that dashboard analogy that I used, where I was thinking about, hey, you have all your indicator lights on your dash. This is just making sure that our CSS is functioning properly before we get into the actual assignment. So your contract for 6.1 has a couple different steps that we've gotten a little bit of a start on, just for some of the structure. We're going to focus specifically on exercise 1 right here. So I'm going to go above my body real quick. This is optional, but I'm going to add a label. It says this is exercise 1, just in an H1 above my div classes like this, so that I can tell which is which later on. I'm also going to add a horizontal line with an HR on line 18 here to again create some separation for exercise 2, which is going to happen right down here. Exercise 2. So that's just a little bit extra setup so we have labels for what we're working with here. Go back to the output, looks something like this. And we'll get into what each of the exercises actually are. So first things first, before we look at any of the responsiveness, before I show you how to do any of the media query syntax or applications or stuff like that, we need to get our CSS in a position that is what the client is actually asking for. So we have extra large 2x normal font, but it's not white, nor is it on a blue background. So we're going to start with that by going to 6.1 blue style. We've already got our font size. Hi, welcome in. We're in the Zoom room. We've already got our font size set to 200%, but we just need to change some of the colors around. Starting with color, setting it to white. And then, my background color is going to be set to blue. Not background dash blue. Background dash color set to blue, like this. And if we go back to our output, we have this lovely blue box with some nice legible text That is ensuring that our thing is functional here. We're going to repeat that. It does look like I keel a bit. We're going to repeat that for the next three HTML elements, making sure our styling is all good before we start making it respond. We need red text on a yellow background. So if we go to 6.1 yellow style, we've already got background color of yellow. We just need to make the text become red by setting the color to exactly that, red. And any text-based element inside of div.yellow is going to have a red text color. You don't have to set font color or text color or anything like that. Color red is going to apply on any text-based element. So we're good there. And if we go to the third and final one on exercise 1, we have black text on a white background, which is just the default when the page is printed. So we don't actually need to write any CSS yet because this one is entirely contingent. It's entirely focused on when the page gets printed. So we're just going to put a pin in this one for now and come back to it later. So we've got what our client is looking for, but we do not have what the client's specific condition with 800 pixels or more, less than 800 pixels, and printing. We don't have our media queries ready to go yet, and I will show you how to do that right now. So in your VS Code, you should be on 6.1 blue style. This is the CSS that our client wants to happen if our condition is met. If the condition of 800 pixels becomes true, then this is going to happen in here. Think about like pseudo classes with hover. The syntax, the way that you write a media query, is you're always going to start with the phrase at media. And it's kind of this pink, purple, magenta sort of situation. This part is me taking notes. So let me finish showing you how to do this before you start coding along with me. You're welcome to do these steps with you so that you, or with me, I mean, so that you have the notes, but I am going to post the notes to the agenda in a second. So you'll have access to those later on. Okay, so once we declare at media, this means we're going to write a conditional statement. We're producing an if. Shannon's your hand up. Okay.
Well, that's so weird. It shut off.
Oh, did all of you guys lose connection? Yeah. Okay, it happens.
I was
All right.
like, why did this try and feedback? Yeah. Yeah, I was like, you're doing updating.
Well, good thing it's recorded. Okay. All right, so we'll let that reconnect. We can find a better home for that.
I didn't want to see a little now. We're super live.
That's so crazy. Oh.
That's so
Okay, so have you guys been able to reconnect?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so lots of technical difficulties in 6 periods. Okay, so we've declared our at media. This means we're going to start writing a conditional. The next thing you need to declare is the actual media type that you're setting. There are 3 main types that we're going to be focusing on for this class. Those 3 types are screen, print, or speech. You have to choose one of those when you're writing your conditional statement. There's also all, which is the default if you don't set anything. But by setting the media to all, you're not really doing anything specific, and it's kind of pointless to set it to all. And if you leave the media type set to blank, it will also set it to all. So it's going to affect all 3 of these different media types. This portion of our media query is the stage where the computer is asking for a little, or the web page is asking for a little bit of information from the computer. So if you're using a screen, that's your media type of screen. If you're printing the web page or you're turning it into a PDF for later, that's your print media type. And then speech is specific to accessibility for screen readers or users who have maybe some visual impairments. By writing media queries for at screen, you improve the accessibility of your web page so that more users can get to your site. Okay, so the first step, or the second step, I mean, after you declare at media, is to choose an actual media type. The next step, because we're writing conditions, we need specific ifs to happen before our then occurs. So next you're going to type and. There's a couple other options you can put after you set your media type, like nor, neither, both. Like there's some confusion that'll happen there. 99% of the time I'm using and. So this is the next portion of our media query. Inside of parentheses, this is where you add some additional, how do I spell that? Is that right? That doesn't look right. Oh, that's additional. additional, okay, additional conditions like min dash width or max dash width.
We're at the red side.
So if I close this, I know my CSS is awful mad because we have written an incorrect media query because I'm showing you guys how they work. Okay, so we've got a media, we've got a type declared, we have our and statement, and then inside of the parentheses, we have some additional conditions like minimum width or maximum width. After you do all that, this functions very similarly to a CSS selector, but instead of being an HTML element, it's a set of rules that need to be met. Delilah, put your phone away, please. Curly bracket, enter. Now inside of here, inside of this curly bracket container that we've built, we put normal CSS. So we have a regular old selector, like what we've been doing for the last few units. We have a selector, then a curly bracket, and inside of that selector container, we have properties and values. And you can have as many as you want because this is just regular CSS that we are used to. It just sits inside of a container of a media query so that when a certain condition is met, then your CSS applies. Shannon, also put your phone away, please. Okay, I'm going to comment this out so that we can kind of keep it as notes for reference, because now we're going to write the media query specific to the div.blue. So what I want you to keep in mind, this is the way that I found best to remember it, is when you're using min width and max width, there's a key difference. And that key difference between those statements is the or more and less than. We're setting what's called a breakpoint, where our web page is going to shift. It's going to break and readjust dependent on how much screen real estate is available. Thankfully, it's the same number, so you can see it transition really easily. But let's focus on this and or more, or sorry, excuse me. Let's focus on this or more portion of the media query. So we're going to start by writing at media. And since we're using a device with a screen, our media type is screen. This is the one that's actually going to be for your blue background. So you want to follow along with this one. All right, so we have our at media type set to screen. Now we need our and conditions. So you write the word and with a parentheses. And inside of the parentheses, I want you guys to put min dash width of 800px. And it's really, really tempting to want to put a semicolon right here after you set your min width value. Do not do that. This is going to behave, that's one of the only things I wish it was the same as regular CSS to keep everything kind of nice and organized, but do not put a semicolon after the 800 pixels. For some reason, it just breaks it. So here's our condition. If we're using a screen and that screen's width is at least 800 pixels, inside of these curly brackets, the specific type of CSS is going to apply. We've already written that CSS for div.blue right up here. So I'm going to highlight that, right click on it, cut it, and then put it by pressing tab, Control V, inside of my media query container here that envelops it so that when the condition is met, the specific type of CSS inside of it is going to be applied. So I delete these, go back here. We're still on blue style inside of our style subfolder. When this condition becomes true, then this CSS inside will be applied. So if I go to my output, let me get my screen ruler pulled up real quick. My monitor that I'm working off of on my projector here is 1280 pixels wide. So if I were to run this HTML, run 6.1, oh, I'm already running it. If I go to 6.1 in this tab, hold on. Oh, yellow div is also working. Okay, sorry. You can see that exercise 1, blue div looks the same as it did when we started, because our width is more than 800 pixels wide. That is because when you use min width as a media query conditional, min width behaves like a starting point. So min dash width is going to equal a starting point for your CSS inside of the container to apply. And I'm going to comment this out so that it doesn't affect the actual query. So min width is going to act as our starting point. If I go to the output, since our screen is larger than 800 pixels, we are past the starting point. The condition is true. The width is larger than 800 pixels. If I were to take my viewport here, my browser window, and make it smaller than 800 pixels, make the media query condition false. Let me minimize some of this stuff back here. Okay, I'm going to resize, 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 resize. Okay, until my blue div stops becoming true. and it goes back to default styling right there. If I pull open my my screen ruler, what happened? It didn't happen again. Okay, so you can see here that my viewport is 789 pixels wide. It's just a couple of G's, because you guys still have it. Okay. It's so hard. You don't have it.
Good. You might wonder what is this one? Wow, I know.
So thankfully you guys are close enough while you wait for it to reconnect. You're gonna have to follow along with me as best we can, and then I'll help you during the work time. Okay, so you can see that my condition is no longer true. The internet might come back on because it's inconsistent among the machines. Okay, cool, it's back. So once I resize my viewport to be larger than 800 pixels, the condition becomes true again, and the CSS happens inside of here. So that's why you want to think of min width as your starting point. Starting at 800 pixels, this CSS will apply. Okay, so that checks off our first box. I'll give you a chance to check my CSS towards the end of the meeting. But let's move on to our next media query, which is the less than 800 pixels wide for our normal size red text on a yellow background. If we go to the output, you can see that yellow div is styled the way that we need it to. It's just media query is not created yet. So we're going to go to the yellow style CSS file. We've got our CSS that our client's looking for. Now we need to write our media query so that we have the condition when it becomes true. So how do I start my media query? At media, okay. What type of device am I using? Screen, okay. I'm not reading this HTML with my brain, as cool as that would be. All right, so we've got our media type set to screen. We need an additional condition. So we have and parentheses. And inside of that and parentheses, you set your max dash width to be 800 pixels, just like the min dash width. So 800 px, ignoring a semicolon right here at the end. You can tell my CSS is mad based on my screen here. Oh, candygrams. Okay, perfect. It's not expecting this.
Give you the back, whenever you have.
Oh, I take this.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Never mind. Okay.
Well, since all that's on the other side. I think.
2207. So I will find out who this belongs to.
Okay, because that door has that.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's right. So these are both me. Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Cool. All right, so we have our media type set to screen and the max width set to 800 px. So we're going to go curly bracket in here. And you want you to think of max width instead of being the starting point. Max width is going to be your ending point. It is the maximum width allowed for whatever CSS you are trying to do inside of here. So we've got our div.yellow. Going to highlight that whole container with all that CSS happening in there. Right click on that, cut it so that it doesn't affect unless the condition is true. Tab over to make sure we're contained nicely within our media query, and Control V that in there. So once the media screen becomes true and the maximum allowed width is 800 pixels, at the ending point of 800 pixels, this CSS will apply. So if I were to go to my output here, you can see that yellow div is no longer functional until I make my viewport, smaller than 800 pixels. That becomes my ending point. So everything less than 800 pixels, you can see is going to apply. But the second I make it more than 800 pixels, see if I can get 801. There we go. That's probably like 803. But the condition's no longer true, so the CSS stops applying and it defaults back to normal. So the last thing that the client's looking for is black text on a white background when the page is printed. So that means we're going to move to our third style sheet for this first exercise. Div.bw, this was just our driver's dashboard to make sure that the CSS was working. This is not actually what the client is asking for in their media query. So how do I start my media query again? Okay, what's my media type this time? It's print. So print is pretty specific. It does not need any additional conditions for the purposes of this assignment. So that's our media query. That's our condition that needs to be met. Instead of writing a rule for the div.bw, because we want when the entire page is printed, no matter the element, what kind of tags, what kind of containers in HTML hold the entirety of the web page? Body's one of them. There's another one. HTML, exactly. These two are going to be the ones that contain the entirety of the web page. HTML is a lot of information. Body's the only visible part of the page. So we're going to go back to our BW style, and on media print, instead of writing a rule for div.bw, we're going to write a rule for the body and then a comma for backup HTML as well. Because remember, you can combine multiple selectors with a comma inside of your CSS to make one set of CSS rules apply to a variety of different HTML elements. And so, since we're setting this back to the default, we have to do it manually, even though the only reason we do this manually is because we have other CSS that interacts or overwrites the manual styling. So we're going to set the color to be black, so that affects all the text-based elements on the page, and the background color to white. And then just for good measure, to make sure that mine is working, you don't have to do this third part. I'm going to set my font size to be 6,000%, so that when I print the page, I know for sure that the media query is working. So I'm going to take this div.bw out because I don't really need it anymore. I suppose I could just comment it out. I'm going to do that. So control question mark to comment that after bringing it back in. Control S to save. If we go back to our output, I think I closed it on accident. I did. Okay. Let me re-go live. Go live once again. All right. So you can see black and white div. We took the border off. It's just behaving normally. If I resize my viewport, make sure yellow div is still working. Perfect. I'm using Firefox, so I have a print button right here, but your print button is likely if you right click or middle finger click inside of the white space, it'll be one of these options from the drop down. But if I click on my print button, it's going to make mine. I think I did it. Hold on. Did I do it backwards?
Pages.
Did I make it 70? Hold up.
6,000% makes it 73 pages.
Mine's 21. There it is. Why
Wait,
do I
look
have
at
so-
mine. This is like.
Oh, it's because of exercise 1. There's a lot of extra stuff in mine. This is new. So this is crazy. Each one of my web design classes, when I set the print media query to be that, has given me 3 different results.
It's
So-
printing out, it can't fit it all on one page, so it's putting some of the letter.
Gotcha.
It's there, but it can't, you know.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Well, we learned something new every day. Logan, you have a question?
Mine would be the exact same.
Yours did 21 pages, or it looks exactly the same?
No, like, it's the exact same.
Okay. So I'm going to take this font size off real quick. What it should look like when it's functioning correctly is when you go to print this page, it should just look normal. It should just look back to the default. It'll take the background color off. It'll take stuff like this off. So like if I change this in my, this is crazy. We're learning a lot about font size 6,000%. Maybe it's to do with the HTML tag. I don't know, but that's that. Hey, that means you wrote the media query correctly. Good job. That means it's working. So for example, though, if I change my, hey guys, refocus. If I change my destination to be save as PDF instead of printing from a printer, you can see that my document is set to color, but the colors are black and white. It's looking normal, like it, like the default should be normally applied. So for exercise number 1, we're gonna go through real quick. Here's what your HTML should look like. Check it against mine. Remember, you need 3 style sheets linked together and each div to have a specific class.
What was the use of all 3 style sheets?
It's to show you that you can link multiple style sheets to one HTML page. Okay, your HTML should look like this. I'm gonna make my way to blue style. So check your HTML against mine while I find my way over to blue style. Your CSS for blue style should look like mine. Check and make sure that it is correct. The comments are optional. Those are just notes. Those are breadcrumbs left for future web design classes, but they are really helpful to remember which does what. Okay, I'm gonna make my way to yellow style. Your yellow style should look like this. And then in the future, you can pause this video and copy it. All right, making my way to BW style for black and white. Your media query should look like this. The div.bw is again optional, but that's just to make sure that your style sheet is working. Your print query should look like mine. Okay. So far, does anybody have any questions about the setup of a media query? Yeah, I'll go quick because we need to do exercise 2. So here's blue. And I'm going to sneak up to yellow. There's yellow. And then I'm gonna go back to my HTML. Okay, perfect. Let's talk about exercise 2 real quick. That's the second half. You guys have finished. As long as your output is behaving like this, when you resize it to less than 800 pixels, it turns yellow. Larger than 800 pixels, it turns blue. And when you print it, it looks normal. Where's my print button? When you print it, it looks normal, or like the default, then you're in a good spot for exercise 1. If one of these is not working, I will check it during the work time because I want to show you guys how to do exercise 2 before I help you with the rest of it. Okay, sound good? All right, I'm gonna push forward. So I'm gonna close this. I'm gonna go close my server by clicking on port. Let's talk about exercise number 2. If we look at the contract, exercise number 2 is asking us using media queries to write a web page that first shows red, green, and blue squares, which are divs, side by side. We got 10 minutes, we're on the clock here, side by side. And when the page is decreased to a certain size, make the squares display in a column instead of a row. Side by side means a row. So first things first, we need some divs. But if I go div.red and then hit enter, that's great because it doesn't interact with any of my earlier classes. Red div. Okay. If I go div.blue, that also shouldn't interact with any of my classes, my earlier classes. And then if I go div.green to set a div with a class, this is green div. Okay. Green div. That's what we need for HTML for CS or HTML exercise 2. However, guys in the front, please. Okay. This div class of blue is the same as this div class of blue. So if I go to my output currently, which is not live, okay, it's already affecting the earlier CSS. We don't want that. So we have two options here. I'm going to delete these div boxes for now. The same way that you can create a div with a class by just typing div dot and then the class name, you can also do that with IDs as well. So if I go div dot blue hashtag box and then hit enter, it's going to add a class of blue and an ID of box. So this is blue box and the order is red, green, blue. So RGB, that's right. So div dot red hashtag box. And then this is my red box. And then after, oops, not that. After my red div dot green hashtag box. That's going to give me a green class ID of box. This is my green box. Now we can make a fourth and final style sheet for this 6.1 so that we can make some style happen for these very specific HTML elements here. If I go to my output, which is not outputting currently, now it is. Blue box is still having some issues. So that means it's still interacting, even though it has an ID of box. The class of blue is affecting the entirety of it. So I'm going to go into blue and add a capital B to the class, blue B for box, so that it separates from the previous one and just behaves like the separate version that I need it to do here shortly. So add B to your blue class name so that it differs from the div class of blue up here. So your HTML should look something like this. 3 divs with a class and an ID specific to their function. Blue B to make sure there's a difference between the original div class. Now we need to make our style sheet. So for exercise 2, click on your styles subfolder so that it turns blue, solid blue. Click on new file. And we're going to go 6.1 ex2 capital S style dot CSS. That's going to be our 4th style sheet that we're going to add here. Okay. We need to do a little bit of housekeeping to get all 3 of our divs to have a specific size. So I'm going to write a rule for divs with an ID of box by setting the width to be 100 px, the height to be 100 px, just so that they have some sizing by default. If I go to my output, it doesn't affect these because these don't have an ID of box, but these it does. And we also have not linked this style sheet yet. So with div hashtag box, that's just going to make anything with a class of box be a 100 square box. So we need to go to our HTML here and add our 4th and final link by typing LINK and clicking on the wrench. Inside of the href, styles is the subfolder, ex2 style is the style sheet. And then after that, we have type equals text / CSS, all the usual Zelda links that we're used to. Now, if we go back to the output, red, green, and blue boxes have a little bit of space between them because they're 100 by 100. But blue, yellow, and black and white are ignored because they don't have that ID of box. So going quickly, because again, I'll be able to help you guys with the work time because I'm running out of Zoom time here. We need to now set our specific for exercise 2. We need to set the class and the ID. So div.red of box, and then a curly bracket. This is where we're going to set our background color to each specific color to the div box. So this is red box, so it's going to have a background color of red. I've already written all this CSS, so I don't need to type all that again. I can Control C, enter, Control V, enter, Control V, and change red here to green, and change the background color to green, and change red on the second one to blue B, because remember, this glass has a specific blue capital B to separate it from blue style. And we'll change that background color to be blue, so that I have very quickly established that my 3 div boxes, specific with their colorful classes, are gonna be the correct color. So if I go back to my output, you can see that they're displaying in a column with the default or with the colors that I've assigned to them. And that's just using classes and IDs in the selector, specifically to the divs that you have written inside of the HTML. I'm actually going to close these so that we're not distracted by them. Get rid of that. Okay. Your HTML should look like this. You can pause the video. Your CSS should look like this. You should pause, or you can pause the video later. Now we need to write our media query that we've set up our regular CSS to be applying here. So 4 minutes left. We can do this. Okay, so when the page is narrowed to less than 800 pixels, it sounds pretty similar to our yellow text over here. Make the squares display in a column instead of a row. Since divs are block level elements, they're already displaying in a column, so we need to change that default by going into our div hashtag box class rule and set that display to be inline dash block. Inline dash block makes your block level elements behave like inline level elements, but it does not remove any width and height that you add to them. So this is going to make our cubes appear in a row as compared to a column. If I just set it to inline like this, it's going to take away all their styling and just turn them into text boxes. So inline dash block is the one that retains all of the style data or the sizing data that I've added here. Okay. Let's speed through this. Let's speed through this media query. We need to change the display when the pixels are less than 800 to back to the default of block, similar to the way that we changed the print query to be back to the default colors. We're going to do that here for the divs. So I'm going to write at media, and I'm using a screen. So those are my first 2 main additions that I make to my media query. And so am I writing a starting point or an ending point if I'm less than 800 pixels?
Sorry.
Are you sure? Ending point, exactly. Ending point is max dash width. So our max width is 800 pixels. We're gonna do the same thing that we did for the print media query and use multiple selectors for one CSS rule. So we're gonna go div hashtag box because multiple divs have the box here. And then curly bracket, instead of setting them to be inline block, because I still want that width and height, you need to be specific in your CSS additions. We're going to change the display back to block so that they maintain their width and height. And it only affects divs with a class of box. So I'm going to check and make sure that that works real quick. It does. So you can see that yellow div appears. We've reached our ending point of 800 pixels. When we hit the ending point, it's going to change them back to the inline block so they display in a row. And when we're less than 800 pixels, it changes them into their default of block so that they appear in a column. So really quickly, for exercise 2, your CSS should look something like mine. I'll quickly go through the HTML so you can see what my HTML looks like. And then just for good measure, here's blue style. Here's print style. This is black and white. And then finally, here's yellow style. I will help you in just a second because I need to finish this video. Okay, so as long as our anchor works for, or as long as your index page has an anchor for your 6.1.html, you are in a good spot. If you're not quite there yet, we'll use the work time today to finish that up. Thank you guys for listening. I will be able to help you one-on-one here in just a second.